Listen.
Welcome to our program, Wonderful World. I'm your host, Jack McFly. This week we are introducing a story about traditional Polynesian navigation. Today we have a special guest, Ms. Uchino Kanako, the first Japanese crew member of Hokulea. Hello, Kanako. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jack. The pleasure is all mine.
So, Kanako, can you tell us about Hokulea?
Well, Hokulea is a replica of a traditional Polynesian canoe. It's a type of double-hulled canoe that was used to sail across the Pacific Ocean. With canoes like Hokulea, ancient Polynesians bravely set out for the oceans long before Europeans started to travel across the world's oceans. In traditional Polynesian canoes, ropes were used to tie the hulls. Surprisingly, the ropes altogether were sometimes several kilometers long.
Listen.
How did Polynesians navigate their canoes?
Today we have GPS to navigate, but Polynesian navigators used nature to show them the way. They were known as wayfinders. They watched for natural signs from the sun, the moon, stars, winds, clouds, and birds.
That's interesting. How did they use them?
Good question. Early in the morning, wayfinders looked carefully at the position of the rising sun. Before the sun got higher in the sky, they tried to read the patterns of waves called faces of the ocean. During the day, they tried to keep their canoe at the same angle to the waves so that they could keep going in the right direction.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Listen.
How did the wayfinders learn these navigation skills?
They learned them from their elders. They learned the names and the movement of more than 200 stars with the star compass. They memorized all this information and had a picture of the stars in their mind.
I heard somewhere that these traditional navigation skills were starting to die out. How were they revived?
In 1975, a group of people in Hawaii built a large canoe called Hokulea. They wanted to demonstrate the skills and methods of the traditional navigators by sailing from Hawaii to Tahiti. A wayfinder was invited from Micronesia to take part in this project. His name was Mau Piailug, and he was one of the greatest wayfinders. He navigated Hokulea successfully from Hawaii to Tahiti. This success led us to rediscover the value of their traditional navigation skills.
Listen.
Kanako, in 2007, you sailed on Hokulea from Hawaii to Japan. It was a 13,000-kilometer trip. Could you tell us about the voyage?
Hokulea's first trip to Japan was quite a challenge. But we rose to the challenge under one slogan, one ocean, one people.
What did you learn from the trip?
We realized that we are connected by one big ocean. During the voyage, I was reminded of the Hawaiian words, "The canoe is an island. The island is a canoe." It means that living on an island is like voyaging on a canoe. We should take care of each other, just as we do on a canoe. We are meant to work together.
You're right, Kanako. Our planet is the canoe, and we are all voyagers. Thank you very much for sharing your experience with us today. We've learned a lot from you.
Thank you, Jack. It has been my pleasure.
Listen.
Cateura is one of the poorest towns in Paraguay. It is located outside the capital, Asunción. It has a huge landfill. It receives tons of waste from the capital each day. The people in the town have to live with all this waste because many of them make their living by selling valuable things from the trash. Children in Kateura grow up in a harsh environment. They often face violence and crime. Some of them become addicted to drugs and alcohol. They also struggle to find meaning in their lives. Fabio Chavez was a social worker in Kateura. Many children were playing in the landfill. They could not go to school because their parents made them work. Fabio felt that he needed to do something.
Listen.
Fabio had always loved music. He used to play the guitar and sing in his church. He started giving the children music lessons to keep them out of trouble. However, there was a problem. Fabio had only 5 instruments. Also, children were too poor to buy their own. In Kateura, a violin was more expensive than a house. Fabio asked his friend Nicholas to make some instruments out of trash. Nicholas was a trash collector and was good at recycling trash. He made oil cans into violins, pipes and spoons into flutes, and packing boxes into guitars. The instruments looked a little strange, but they sounded so beautiful. I never imagined making instruments. I was glad that the kids liked them, says Nicholas.
Listen.
The children got better at playing the instruments. Then Fabio came up with a good idea. He formed an orchestra. Soon it grew from just a few members to over 35. The orchestra gave new meaning to the life of the children and their families. My life is worthless without music, says Tanya. She plays the violin in the orchestra. The recycled orchestra became famous not only in Paraguay, but also in other countries in South America. The incredible melodies touched many people. Its concerts in Brazil and Colombia were a great success. People in Canada and the U.S. also heard the children perform. The orchestra plays the classical music of Beethoven and Mozart. It also plays the popular music of the Beatles. The children are very proud that they are part of the orchestra. We are doing the impossible. The world sends us garbage. We send back music, says Fabio.
Listen.
Movie producer Juliana Peñaranda heard the orchestra play. She thought the children were fantastic. Soon she started making a movie, Landfill Harmonic. It features Fabio, Nicholas, and the children. It is about their creativity, hope, and endurance. The orchestra has made a big difference to the lives of people in Kateura. Also, Juliana hopes to raise people's awareness of global issues by using poverty and garbage management in Kateura as an example in point. Sometimes real musical instruments are donated to the children. Fabio, however, wants them to use the instruments made from recycled materials. The recycled instruments can help people learn about poverty in Kateura. We are facing many global issues now. Do you know about them? As global citizens, each one of us needs to consider how we can solve these issues.
Listen.
In 1998, Life, a famous magazine in the U.S., asked this question in a survey. Who was the most important person of the past 1,000 years? The magazine made a top 100 list. Thomas Edison, Christopher Columbus, and Martin Luther were the top 3. In this list, there was only one Japanese. Can you guess who it was? Katsushika Hokusai, a famous ukiyo-e artist in the Edo period, was on the list. You may wonder why, but the following words by Edgar Degas, a famous French painter, will answer your question. He wrote, "Hokusai is not just one artist among others in the floating world. He is an island, a continent, and a whole world in himself." In the latter half of the 19th century, the works of Hokusai and others were introduced to Europe. They had a great influence on Western art, and the movement was called Japonism. In fact, knowing about this influence makes it possible to appreciate the works of such great artists as Claude Monet, Vincent van Gogh, and even Pablo Picasso.
Listen.
Around 1856, Félix Bracquemond, a French painter, came across some prints of Hokusai manga, which impressed him greatly. Most likely, they were used to wrap porcelain from Japan. Until then, paintings in Europe were mainly about war, religion, and important people. On the other hand, Hokusai manga showed all kinds of things. It included common people, small creatures, imaginary animals, and ghosts. These subjects were new to the European art scene. Édouard Manet, a friend of Félix, also loved the works of Japanese artists and borrowed some of these ideas. For example, the figures of his works had a flat look and were outlined in black. These were the influences from Japanese woodblock prints. Many artists were inspired by the works of ukiyo-e artists and Japanese art in general. Some of them started a new style of painting called Impressionism. Vincent van Gogh, for instance, was a great fan of Japanese art. He collected hundreds of ukiyo-e prints and used them in the background of some of his paintings.
Listen.
Hokusai was a man of extraordinary talent and character. He left us many great works, including Hokusai manga and 36 views of Mount Fuji. It is said that he moved 93 times. He changed his artist name more than 30 times as he changed his style of painting. Though it was common for Japanese artists to change their names, he did so more than any other artist. Here is a story that shows his unique talent and character. When he was working on the series of Hokusai manga, he heard some people say that he could draw nothing more than very small pictures. When he heard this, he decided to create a large portrait of Dharma in front of a crowd of people. He kept on painting with large brushes for several hours. It was so big that people could not figure out what he had painted until it was hung from tall scaffolding the next morning.
Listen.
Hokusai was born in 1760 in the Katsushika district of Edo, now Sumida-ku, Tokyo, and died in 1849 at the age of 90. He was poor during his lifetime, but devoted himself to art. He wrote at the end of 100 Views of Mount Fuji, "Around the age of 6, I enjoyed drawing things. From 50 on, I drew some pictures that people liked. My paintings before 70, however, were all worthless. At 70 or so, I came to understand the structure of animals and the life of plants. By 86, I will surely understand them much better. And by 90, I will have understood them further. At 100, won't I have a perfect understanding? At 110 or 20, every dot and stroke I make will be alive. So, God, give me the chance to show that this is the case." He also said before dying, "If I have another 10 years or just 5 more years, then I will become a real painter." The great artist who changed world art was never happy with himself as a painter. Listen.
Anpanman was published way back in 1973. It was the year when Yanase Takashi turned 55. When Anpanman was published, Yanase was not famous as a cartoonist. Anpanman, whose head is made of bread, was the superhero of his masterpiece. When he found hungry children, Anpanman offered them part of his head as food. In the early books, he also wore an old cape with patches, but he loved it. He was an unlikely superhero. After World War II, American culture started to affect Japan. Superheroes such as Superman were very popular among children. Many Japanese children played Superman by wearing a cape and pretending to fight bad guys. Yanase had his own idea of superheroes. Those superheroes defeat their enemy and say justice has been done. But I don't think they are true superheroes. True superheroes help people in need.
Listen.
Throughout his life, Yanase thought about justice. When he was young, he wanted to be a cartoonist. At that time, however, Japan was at war, and he had to become a soldier. When he went to war, he was told it was a war for justice. At 24, he was sent to China. Just before the end of World War II, he was made to walk 1,000 kilometers on the battlefield in China. He saw and experienced true hunger in the army. That was a bitter memory for him. Japan was defeated, and the war ended. Many people were still suffering. Yanase could not believe that justice meant defeating other people. He asked himself, "What is true justice that can stand the test of time?" Then he came to believe that justice is giving food to hungry people. This led him to the idea of Anpanman.
Listen.
The first Anpanman was published 28 years after the war. At that time, some kindergarten teachers did not want children to read it. They thought it was cruel to have one's head eaten by others. Some critics said children would never be interested in such a story. They did not think Anpanman was a good book for children to read. In spite of those criticisms, Yanase continued to draw Anpanman. Then he started to notice some changes. One father said his child loved Anpanman and read it over and over. A kindergarten teacher said her kindergarten had bought several copies of Anpanman because the books became worn out quickly. Yanase was able to win the hearts of his little readers. As he continued to work on Anpanman, he began to see that children are formidable. They are innocent and always give straight answers. They are honest critics who toss the books they don't like, he said. He decided to communicate his message honestly. The message for the children was, "What is justice? We can't do justice without being hurt."
Listen.
Soon after the Great East Japan earthquake on March 11th in 2011, requests for Anpanman's march flooded into radio stations. Probably the people who requested this song wanted all children who had experienced the disaster to listen to it. They believed words such as, "I realize how great the joy of life is, even if the scar in my heart hurts," would cheer up the children. However, adults also became encouraged by the song and repeated their requests. This song gave consolation and courage not only to the people struggling in Tohoku, but also to people all over Japan. That year, Yanase was 92 years old and was planning to retire. However, the disaster changed his mind. In order to encourage the people in Tohoku, he painted a new Anpanman poster, though his eyes had become quite weak. Then he wrote a song about the famous pine tree that survived the tsunami. He identified himself with the pine tree. 2 years later, he passed on, but left Anpanman with us. If it were not for Anpanman, we would be without one great source of smiles, love, and courage.